past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Greetings. Welcome back as always. Thank you all so much for joining us today. There is a plan for Trump to seek third term in 2028, Steve Bannon says. The MAGA podcaster and former West Wing aide Steve Bannon suggested in a recent interview with The Economist, no less, that a plan exists for President Trump to attempt to defy the Constitution and seek a third term in office in 2028. Quote, Trump is going to be president in 28, and people just ought to get accommodated with that, he told The Economist. He also said that it's divine or divinely inspired. How could this happen? What does this mean? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events and the broader historical context in which most of these events take place. Let's quickly look at a couple of today's headlines. First, monster hurricane to hit Jamaica. Hurricane Melissa is forecast to bring up to 40 inches of rain, 9 to 13 feet of storm surge, and destructive winds when it makes landfall in Jamaica late tonight into tomorrow. The hurricane is continuing to strengthen, reaching a Category 5 intensity as it approaches Jamaica, where it is set to deliver this devastating blow. As of this morning, the storm had sustained winds of 160 miles an hour and was just about 100 miles south of Jamaica's main island, crawling west about 3 miles per hour. It'll make landfall probably as the country's strongest storm on record, surpassing Hurricane Gilbert. Two things. One, they're saying sustained winds of 160 miles an hour. But from what I understand, when you get up into the higher elevations of the Blue Mountains, winds could hit 200 miles an hour. And the other problem is with this estimated storm surge of 9 to 13 feet, as that water comes ashore and the over 2 feet of rainwater comes down the mountain, when the storm surge water hits the rainwater will have no place to go. That means the flooding will be catastrophic. That's it for the weather for the show today. U.S. deploying aircraft carrier strike group near Venezuela as regime change push heats up. The U.S. military is deploying the USS Gerald Ford to the waters near South America as the Trump administration continues its military buildup in the Caribbean and its push towards war with Venezuela. And understand, folks, it costs somewhere between $6 to $8 million per day to operate that strike group. Also, finally, Israel launched airstrike in Gaza on Saturday after getting U.S. approval. The Israeli Defense Force has killed at least 93 Palestinians in Gaza since the ceasefire went into effect. And is it a ceasefire if they're launching airstrikes in Gaza? On today's episode, the issue before us is the 22nd Amendment. Section 1 reads as follows, quote, "No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice, and no person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of president more than once," end quote. Again, at the appropriate time, we will lay out what the plan is, Bannon said, but there is a plan. How concerned should we be? Let's talk to my guest. He's a retired colonel in the U.S. Army and former chief of staff to the U.S. Secretary of State, Colin Powell. He was special assistant to General Powell when he was chair of the Joint Chiefs. He is Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. As always, sir, welcome back.
Good to be with you, Wilmer.
Well, I do want to talk about the mechanics of this, because I don't think you can avoid discussing the mechanics of this. But what signals does this send to you? How concerned should Americans be?
Very, I think. And you loaded up your initial comments so much, I need to talk about a number of things that you said there.
Okay.
But
please, the floor is yours, sir.
Let me take that one on first. I watched Bannon with Bill Maher, and Bill essentially said, "Here's the Constitution. You want to read it?" And Bannon didn't take it. All I can think of is what I've been thinking of now increasingly for the past month, maybe month and a half. And that is, I see all the signs as if I were a German in 1933 and 34 of a creeping coup. What I see are everything that's necessary to make what happened on January the 6th before, that we all know was some sort of attempt to change the way the Constitution and the presidency work, failed. It failed because the coup plotters were incompetent. It did not fail because the system held. The system showed its fragility manifestly. So my conclusion after that was, if this man comes back with the entourage of people like Steve Bannon, then the coup plotters will not make that mistake again. They will get into their hands those elements of power within the United States that they need to have an effective coup. And they are working assiduously to develop all these things. Therefore, and it includes the military, of course, which they're working day and night on. That's the only way I can see Bannon with that smugness on his face, because he knows that they're going to be performing a coup d'etat, and they're going to put Trump in, and Trump will be the imperial king, the president, whatever, for the rest of his life. Now, I've said markedly, and I think I'm right, Trump won't be there for a third term's time period per the Constitution, because he's going to die. I'm his age. I know what death looks like when it stares you in the face. Trump's going to be dead by that time. So that worries me even more, because what they are doing with this apparatus they're creating in order to effect a coup is they are working on Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance and other people we could name who are in the shadows behind them. And they're working on a technocratic state that a board of executives will run, and it will run just like a corporation. This is what Benjamin Franklin wrote about way back there in the 1700s, that the most dangerous, looking at the British East India Company as a quintessential example, which at times had more power than the king, queen, or the parliament. He said corporations are the bane of the earth, and certainly the bane of any kind of people's government. Once you turn your government over to corporate rule, you are ruined, because the dollar will become your entire goal. It'll become your principle. And that means the people suffer. Even more so, he thought, than under a monarch. He would have rather had a monarch, at least a benevolent monarch, than have had a corporate rule like the British East India Company. So I think that's what we're headed for. That's what they think we're headed for. And they're doing everything they possibly can to prepare that.
when you say coup, most people hearing that would say, well, wait a minute, how can it be a coup when Donald Trump is already there? He can't overthrow himself. So if you could quickly explain when you say they are planning a coup, what does that mean?
Primarily, it means nullifying the Congress, which they've done to a remarkable degree already, and we'll find out just to what degree when the midterms occur. And they're working right now assiduously to ensure that if the midterms look like for legal and principled purposes, legitimate purposes, they're going the other way, they're going to thwart that. And the plans they're making are the same kind of plans I saw only in spades that George W. Bush and Karl Rove and others made in 2004. And in fact, put into effect in Ohio. And you remember that look on Karl Rove's face when Fox News called Ohio for the Democrats? And he said, that can't be. That can't be, because he knew how they cheated. Only the Democrats found out how he was cheating and cheated back on him. And so they lost Ohio. But this will be across the country this time, I think. If they think they're going to lose the midterms, they will cheat big time. So you got to get those kinds of things. You got to get the Congress in your hands, which they have pretty much succeeded in doing at this point. And then you got to get the Supreme Court in your hands. And I think they've succeeded in doing that to the extent that they have the majority and a couple of really corrupt justices, Thomas leading the pack, for example. But there's a couple of others that are just as bad as he. And then you got to get the military. The military is the sine qua non of a successful coup, whether it's a silent one, which is the kind they want, or whether it's a bloody one, which is the kind they will have if they can't get the silent one. And he's working on the military from all manner of angles. Quantico was working on the top, if you will, working on the top NCOs and the top generals and admirals. Now he's working on through recruiting, and Hegseth is having some success. We people who were working on recruiting for the all-volunteer force didn't think was possible unless you did something like this. What Hegseth is focusing on is bonuses and money and those people who will be the kind of cheerleaders that Trump wants for his presidency. And you go to West Virginia, you go to Oklahoma, you go to Alabama, you go into MAGA country, and you go into Christian nationalist country, and you recruit only those people. And most of those people are men. There are a few women, but most of them are men. So you're going to see recruiting in women drop off, I'm sure. But right now, the recruiting has picked up a little bit because that's what they're doing. They're doing the same thing with ICE. They're offering these people incredible money to come serve on ICE, and you don't have to have too many credentials.
You mentioned Christian nationalism, and I mentioned this at the top in the intro, but in listening to that interview with Steve Bannon, he talked about the divine nature of this.
Yes.
And when he said that, that took me from, oh, this is really just another flooding the zone, as Steve Bannon talked about. Oh, we're going to throw so much stuff out there that people won't know what to do. When he interjected the divinity behind this, that to me was, oh, this is a clarion call to white Christian nationalists, and there's more to this than meets the eye.
You bet. White Christian nationalists / Zionists.
Thank you.
That's what we're looking at here. And remember, divine right of kings.
Yes.
That was always an expression that was used.
Yes.
Divine right of kings. That's what Steve Bannon's talking about. And Steve Bannon wouldn't know a Sermon on the Mount Christian if he met one. These are not Christians that Jesus Christ, the one represented in the New Testament, whatever version you want to read, would recognize. Jesus Christ would not recognize any of these people.
You mentioned the divine right of kings, and for those who may wonder what that's referring to, the king is considered by the king to be God's representative on earth.
Yeah, chosen by God.
Chosen by God. So if you were a serf and the king came walking by and you said, "Hey, king, why are you king?" He'd say, "Because God made me so."
Exactly.
Go back to toiling in the field.
Yep.
So the divine right of kings is what the so-called royal family. That's why they believe that they are the royal family, because they are God's representative on earth. I
was just going to say, when you say that, I just finished reading a marvelous book about King James, he that was responsible for the King James version of the New Testament. And it was on Shakespeare too, and King Lear and other things that happened around that time. And it was a marvelous book because it took Lear, and Lear is a very different tragedy by Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. It's not the typical tragedy. It's not Macbeth. It's not Hamlet. It's not Romeo and Juliet. Lear is a very, very dark tragedy. And the people die in it. Usually at the end of Shakespeare, you have one guy die maybe, but you don't have the whole crowd die. And one of the reasons that Shakespeare did that was to please James. You know, Elizabeth was dead. James was a different monarch, and Shakespeare didn't know exactly how to deal with him. So he was going to write Lear the way he thought James would like it. And all this had to do with the gunpowder plot and a number of other things that happened at that time. Okay. But James crafted the New Testament in a way that I don't know that Paul or Jesus or Peter or any of the original ones would have recognized, except he kept in there that strain that evinces itself in the Sermon on the Mount, that Christ was the champion of the impoverished, mm-hmm. the champion of the left out, mm-hmm. the champion of the minority, if you will, not the champion of the big money. You know, he threw the moneylenders out of the temple. The mm-hmm. only time that I can find that Christ lost his temper, actually became angry and said some things that he probably regretted afterwards. But he threw them out and then criticized them majorly. So this is not the Christ that any of these people today who are super Zionists or Christian nationalists or whatever, it's not the Christ they recognize.
Let the congregation say amen.
Yeah.
When you, I want to connect two other dots here. When you have Steve Bannon in 2017 during the Frontline interview talking about the deconstruction of the administrative state, and I know there are those saying, Wilmer, here you go with this again. Folks, this matters. And then you've got now the director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vought, talking about we're in a post-constitutional America. And then you now come back to Bannon last week saying Trump's going to be president in 28. Now these pieces of this puzzle really, really start to fit.
Yes, and your comment about Vought is very pertinent, because he's Project 2025 guy.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And if you read that really closely and you parse his comments since then, and even more so, look at his actions since then, he's taken what Richard Nixon started to do, which was to turn lots of appropriations that were supposedly only by the Constitution approved in a way that they could be expended by the legislature, and turn them over to the executive branch. Well, Vought is turning billions over to the executive branch, and we don't even know where he's turning them over to, or to whom, or mm-hmm. what purposes, and so forth. But right now, you've probably got anywhere from $60 to $75 billion of taxpayer money that has no trace on it at all, no track on it at all. You put that with the 50 to 75 billion that the Defense Department can't find every year, and mind you, someone finds that money every year, right. usually defense contractors. But Vought is working to get the government's hands on it so that it doesn't get wasted in defense contractors, which I would be for under normal times, but these aren't normal times. What he's doing is filling the coffers of those who shall come after Trump.
Now filling the coffers of those who come after Trump. And Kevin Baptiste, thank you for that $5 super sticker. To that point, Kevin asks, so Colonel, what's your prognosis? What are the chances of this coup taking place?
I give them 60% chance of success in some form or another. It may be a little bloody for a while, but I don't think it'll be bloody for long if they're successful. And this is key. No coup ever succeeds in any state of reasonable size and power unless that element of the state that is sanctioned for lethality, the military, but it can be the militia, it can be the police force, it depends on the state. But unless those forces that are sanctioned officially for lethality come in with the coup, you're not going to succeed.
And here's another data point on all of this, and that is Trump also said on Sunday that he will ban early voting for midterms in what they described as a panicked rant. He said mail-in ballots and early voting would be prohibited for the upcoming midterm elections, since or citing the claims that the 2020 election was rigged. Now, we know that the timing of the election for president is in the Constitution. But because of our federal system, where power is separated between the national government and state governments, the mechanisms of voting are left to the state. That's why, for example, folks, you can have electronic voting machines in some states and paper ballots in others. With that being understood, Trump says we're not going to have early voting. That's a state prerogative. How do you see him trying to work through that issue?
I don't think he talked to his advisors, first of all. He just talked off the top of his head like he does all the time. I was a member of the 2015-2016 election task force that studied elections across the country like probably no one ever has before. We were about 65 people, 55 or 56 of us were election experts, federal election task force people like that who really knew what they were doing. You're absolutely right. 90% or better of the paraphernalia for elections is in the states. So if you're going to infect things in that regard, you have to get into the states by name. All 50 of them, they have different ways of doing things. So you have to get into the states. Well, the Republicans have done that to a certain extent, and they're trying to do it to a larger extent by gerrymandering and so forth. But the Democrats are throwing rocks back at them too. So I don't expect them to be any much better than they were in 2016, for example, where they owned about 27, 28 of the state legislatures, a majority, but not a large majority. But you still have a problem getting into that apparatus, whether it's computers, paper ballots, a combination of the two, or whatever. And here's the other thing Trump hasn't talked to the leaders in the Republican Party about, and he will. And he'll figure some way to walk that back a little bit, or he just won't do it. Republicans benefit more from early voting than Democrats.
Well, in fact, wait a minute. In fact, people need to understand that the early voting mechanism was created by Republicans.
Absolutely.
So that they could facilitate those living in rural areas. So that they could get their back. Early voting was a Republican plan. So was the 8A set-aside program, but that's a whole nother conversation. I'm just saying that I throw that out there as further I'm talking about 8A. I throw that out there as further evidence that some of the mechanisms that they are staunchly opposing now were initiated by their own to begin with.
Yes. And he's listening to people like Laura Loomer and others who don't have a full brain, you know, and they're operating on, oh, God told me this yesterday, or the devil told me that yesterday week. The Republicans will tell him, don't be doing this. You can say it if you want to, but we're not going to be doing it because we'll hurt our own voters. What really worries me, though, is the threat of these ICE people, and to a certain extent, in certain states, the guardsmen, and what they will do to intimidate voters who go to vote at normal places, which is still the majority. That's not good. That's not good. If I see a single National Guardsman or ICE person around the high school where I vote, I'm going to walk up to them and tell them to get their asses out of the place.
To that point, with the Proposition 50 in California, for example, which will be on the ballot, I think next week is when they hold their election. Trump has gone to the Department of Justice and is asking the DOJ to send observers to California. So when you talk about National Guardsmen being at the polls, that just made me think about, well, he's starting with DOJ and sending DOJ operatives to the polls.
Right. And it should be, when I was on maneuvers in Georgia one year, way back when, I was voting for Sam Nunn, as I recall. It was a Senate race. I forgot and took my driver and Jeep into the polling place in Columbus, Georgia, and got out of the Jeep in my full uniform with my .45 pistol on my hip and started walking to the polls. And I was immediately stopped by a bevy of civilians who said, "You can't come within 400 meters of a polling place dressed like that." I said, "Oh, mea culpa. I'm sorry. Went home and changed my clothes and came back and voted."
But still had your gun.
That's no. Well, it was in my belt buckle. Wasn't loaded anyway. But that's how rigorous they were, and that's how rigorous they should be.
In fact, you know what? If you would speak to that, because one of my students, we were talking about this in class today, and one of my students asked me, "Well, what can we do? What are we supposed to do?" And that kind of goes back to Kevin Baptiste's question regarding your prognosis. And because now I think so many people are overwhelmed with all that's going on. What do you say to my student? What do you say to Kevin? What are Americans supposed to do? Understanding that the first three words of the Constitution start with "we, the people."
I would refer them to another document, which I consider just as quintessentially a part of our beginning and our makeup as the Constitution. They were written pretty much the same time, within the same decade or decade and a half, and that's the Declaration of Independence. And I would pay attention to particularly that part that reads something like, "When a people enter a situation where the government that is over their heads is not delivering, the people have a right to protest." And the suggestion is strong there because they're talking about Britain, of course, who at that time had soldiers quartered in their homes. We aren't quite there yet, but we could get there. You have a right to actually take up arms and rebel. Now, what I would say is it needs to start with something a hell of a lot more nationwide, comprehensive, and constant as No King's Day. It's one thing for all the little ladies in tennis shoes and so forth to get out on the square. And I saw it in Falls Church. I saw it in Arlington. I participated in Falls Church. But it was decorum par excellence. And that's the way it should be probably in the beginning. But we need all across the country, and we need millions, not 2 or 3 million across the country. I'm talking 30 or 40 million across the country. And we need to keep that up. And we need to make a statement as a people that we will not accept people like Bannon, Vaught, Trump, Thiel, you Musk, you name it, if they are going to not abide by the Constitution, that we will take the Constitution and shove it down their throat and make them eat it with pepper.
Without a court, or with an incredibly biased, weak court, as you alluded to, some of them being on the take, and you can define that any way, folks, you want to. How do you do that with a weak court that is obviously leaning towards the unitary executive theory?
I think the problem is more than it is corrupt justices, and there are a couple that I think fit that bill. I think it's more philosophical with them, especially Roberts. And Alito, Alito has an ideology that escapes me. It's sort of like the ideology of Bibi Netanyahu, I fear. But there are members on the court who will be frightened jurisprudently,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the term is, legally,
Yes.
personally, if the crescendo of objection within the country grows long and loud enough, particularly if it's reflected in the district courts and in the lower courts in general. And those courts are not so corrupt. And if many of them begin to vote for the people, as it were, even if it goes up to the Supreme Court and gets reversed, if it just keeps on happening and keeps on happening and the people stand up behind those cases, then even the courts can be changed. In fact, I would say the courts, because the law is such a crucial part of our government. It really is. You know, Madison, I think it was, and Jefferson echoed it by saying, if men were angels, we wouldn't need law, but because they aren't, we need law.
Mm-hmm.
And if that can be turned against them, eventually the Supreme Court will recognize that their professional responsibilities are being, laid bare before them, and they're going to go down in history as the biggest jerks on the face of the earth in the legal sense. And they'll switch, I think, all but maybe 2 of them. And all you need is 6. You really need 5. I'd want 6.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, now, a couple things. One that just came to mind is today, in 1787 was the Federalist paper number 1 was published, for those of you that care about things like that.
Yeah.
Federalist paper number 1 was published today. Ken McGee asks, what are the critical states that Trump and company need to target to pull this off? I know there are large states that matter, but what are some others we need to closely watch in this dangerous plan?
You have to sit down and go state by state, and you have to do it almost like we did with the election task force. And they're doing it right now. And I'd recommend to everyone, I can send you the email of the website for the election task force, because they're back operating again now. And they're going to report daily on this upcoming election midterm, and then they'll report on the federal presidential election in November 2 years later. That's the best source I know of for keeping up with each state as you go along. But the states that are critical in the scheme of things as it's unrolled before, the states like New York, California, Pennsylvania, the states that have the most people in them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at the swing states, and you look at who owns the swing states in terms of the party, and what are they doing at that time to corrupt the process, if anything. And there again, the election task force gives you daily visibility in what's happening on the street, wherever that street is, whether it's Houston or Austin or New York or Los Angeles or Sacramento, whatever it is that's critical for that state's election process, they give you reports on that. And it's almost blow by blow. And as you get closer and closer to the elections, it's hour by hour. They even report on who's harassing whom and what election line and where. That's the best source I know of to keep up with it. And if you keep up with it, then you know where locally you can make the biggest difference. Because if you live in Houston, for example, you're not going to run to LA to try to impact that one.
Mm-hmm.
But you watch the one in Houston, if something's going haywire there, then you can start taking action.
You mentioned a little earlier about expansive recruiting of MAGA types for rank and file of the active duty military. Can you elaborate on that? In how significant is this? Because there's no mystery that, no secret that there have always been skinhead affiliated individuals in the military.
Yeah.
So this MAGA movement, can you talk about what levels they're being recruited and where can people go to get some further insight into this?
It's difficult because DOD keeps a very close hold, but here's some general parameters. Before Trump was elected, and I don't give Biden credit for this, I give presidents a couple of terms before Biden even. because it started and then came to some sort of fruition with President Obama, fruition being it sort of got across the whole country.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the National Security Council approved document that had to be adhered to by all the cabinet agencies, but particularly by DOW now. And that was to root out extremism. It had an acronym, and everything gets an acronym in the government. But you were to go after any kind of extremism that you found in the ranks of your cabinet department, but in particular in the military, because as you just said, that's where it showed its ugly head a lot. Whether it was religious extremism, anti-Semitism, for example. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've seen what's happening at the Air Force Academy right now. A blatant case of anti-Semitism is going on right there now.
No, I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, and they've got themselves some really bad press, but they've been a hotbed ever since they located in Colorado and got close to that, deep Christian nationalist community. Right. So you look at what that was and you say, well, that was pretty good that they were going to root out all these white racists and other things. Well, guess what Trump did when he first came in? He eradicated all of that. Guess who led the pathway? Pete Hegseth. Eradicated it all because they said it was part of the diversity and equity campaign, the woke campaign. That it wasn't aimed at their people. That's who it was aimed at, their people. I mean, they're right about that. It was aimed at that group that they sent over to Gaza to be the security element for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Bikers who wore shirts that said, "I hate Islam." Mm-hmm. Bikers that went over there and served in the security component of the Humanitarian Foundation that was funded by Israel and the United States to the tune of $30 million tax, our tax dollars, mm-hmm. and they kill Palestinians at the humanitarian sites. And they didn't kill themselves with their machine guns. They weren't just holding AKs or M16s. They carried Heckler & Koch machine guns out there. They fired into the crowds coming up to the water and the food points, mm-hmm. pushed them back into the IDF, who then declared them unruly and fired back into them with main gun tank ammunition. 75 to 125 died almost every day at the 4 sites that they ran. These are the kind of people they're recruiting into the military now. They would not have been able to get in under those previous directives against violent extremism in the ranks of the government. But Trump abolished all those directives. And now they can recruit them anywhere they find them. And I'm sorry to say, white racists alone, there are plenty of them.
Well, and so then we connect that to the dot of the January 6th protesters that he pardoned.
Yes.
And that shows you a much broader sample size.
Yeah, he wants all these criminals out there who are indebted to him. That's what he wants. He wants people indebted to him and will follow him to the death because he's been good to them.
Well, and of course it's also divine. I mean,
of course,
you can never forget
it's God's will.
Father Bannon saying that it is divine will. Shaniqua
Bannon talking religion is kind of like the devil talking about Jesus' sermon on the mount. I mean, Bannon he makes me ill.
Shaniqua McAdams, Colonel, do you think Bannon is talking about the Convention of States? They already have 19 states signed on to his movement.
There could be a convention of states like we're trying to get right now and are being very successful in getting, mind you. To our movement is to get 39 states to pass the amendment we've crafted to get rid of Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision that put black money into politics. We're trying to do that. They could do the same thing because 3/4 of the states constitutes almost the same kind of power that a majority vote in the Congress does, whether it's a simple majority, a cloture majority, mm-hmm. or a supermajority, 2/3 or 3/4 for a constitutional amendment. So if he's talking about doing it that way, that's a very crude way to do it, and you would have to be crooked as hell to get it to work. And we're finding that out with this. We fashioned our movement. It's called America Promise. We fashioned our movement after the women's movement to get the vote. We looked at all the constitutional amendments, including prohibition and the one to eliminate prohibition. And we said, which one really shows the greatest character, the greatest truth in terms of American values, real, ancient, original values, not what Trump's talking about. Make America great again is bullshit. We looked at that and we said, man, this movement was incredible. These women were so dedicated and they were so true to the original founders' version of how this country should work. We want to do ours just like they did it. And so we read all we could on it. And now we've got 24 working on 25 states, and we have to get 39 eventually. But we're pretty successful. We've been in states like Wyoming, where all of a sudden we thought we were going to have a tough fight. All of a sudden we got a resolution out of that state almost 6 months into being there. And they said, the resolution by the state simply says, when time comes, we're with you. When we go to the Congress and say, we got 39 states, let's do the Constitutional Convention and let's have a constitutional amendment.
Is there a concern if you actually have a constitutional convention that it's not limited merely to the amendment being proposed, that you run the risk of opening up the Constitution to other possible amendments?
Yeah, that is a problem that people have talked about and we've thought about. And if it looked like that were going to happen, you can do it just by the people. You don't need the Congress. If you've got 3/4 of the states, the Congress has to recognize that and legislate accordingly. Now, then your problem becomes, okay, this is our language and we have sacrosanct language. We don't want that. We want it simple and clear. We want language that constitutionally eliminates the Supreme Court decision to declare money free speech. That's really what it's all about. And if you get to that point and you demand that clarity be there and Congress doesn't give it to you, it's my understanding anyway, this is a sort of an arcane business, which Bannon is probably counting on. But as I understand it, they have to act. They have to say, okay, it goes back out to the states now. Here's the wording. We'll craft the wording the way you want it. Now it goes back out to the states. Each of the states has a convention, and like they did with the women, and each state has to pass by the majority vote. I think it's a 3/4 vote there too. Each state has to pass it. And once each state has passed it, 39, then it is an amendment to the Constitution.
I just want to connect a historic dot. You were talking about the power of people impacting the court, and the court realizing the shift in mindset amongst the masses. That's what happened with the Supreme Court during FDR's tenure as president. Actually, that's also what got us the 22nd Amendment, was that the court initially, they were rejecting his New Deal programs, but as FDR was reelected and the court came to understand that FDR had the public support behind him, and he threatened to enlarge the court, hence we get the switch in time to save 9. But my point is, it was the court seeing that FDR's programs were popular that shifted the mindset of a number of the justices on the court. So it can also, my point is, it can also happen the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was Justice Jackson that said one time, he was the justice that presided at Nuremberg. He said, when the people in mass move, the court better follow. And there's some truth to that, even though this court has shown that it is willing to defy the people on occasion. I don't think if it's a majority moving rather smartly in one direction, and the lower courts are upholding more often than not what those people want, I don't think the Supreme Court's going to be able to stand up to it. Now, they would abolish the court. Bannon would just abolish the court. They would say, okay, we've done our coup now. We're not going to have the court. We will have a king court, whatever they want to establish as the Supreme Court of the land. I don't fault these people for being meticulous in detail. All you have to do is read Project 2025 to know that. What I fault them for is claiming, well, more than this, but claiming to be originalists when they haven't a clue what the original Constitution stood for or meant. And I'm talking about the Supreme Court people.
Correct. There was a question, what is Proposition 50? Proposition 50 is the ballot proposition in California right now to temporarily suspend the citizen redistricting committee that draws the congressional districts every 10 years based upon the census output, and replacing that temporarily with a committee that will redraw the districts, giving California, I think, about 4 more congressional seats to offset what Texas is doing. So that's the Proposition 50.
And of course, the reason many states, or at least a few, have done that sort of thing is they didn't like the gerrymandering and they wanted it to stop. So they created committees that would not be motivated by anything but the way the land lies and the way the voters vote, looking at it in a reasonable fashion, not looking at it, oh, how can I make Republicans win? Oh, how can I make Democrats win? So California is going back to that old way of doing things so they can do that, at least for an interim period.
Yes. And Ken asks, he says, you mentioned a website for people to monitor the voting processes that are going on. Do you know off the top of your head what that website is?
Well, I can tell you this right now. Just Google National Election Task Force, and the site will come up.
Okay, got it.
Pretty automatic now.
National
Election Task Force.
Let's see what we get. We get the National Election Task Force, which is electiontaskforce.org. Electiontaskforce.org. So Mel, if you could put that in the scroll, if you can do that. National
if you look at some of the members in there, there are people from the Federal Election Task Force, from the Federal Election Committee. There are people from the states. Some of the people we had that came up from the states were just extraordinary people. I mean, they know it better than any federal person in their state, and they know what the weaknesses and the strengths are. And by and large, they will tell you that the weaknesses and the strengths are, and the strengths dominate on both sides of the political aisle, the people. The people are pretty damn good, and they've been doing it for a long time. They've been doing it with multiple systems, from combinations of computers and ballots to just ballots, back to computers again, back to different kinds of verification mechanisms and such. And they know their laws very, very thoroughly and well. And so if you leave them alone, by and large, they will conduct an honest and a fair election. The problem is when, the national people come in and interfere with them.
Switching gears, I mentioned this in the open, that the USS Gerald Ford battle group is on its way from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean Sea. And there's a lot of discussion, a lot of concern that Donald Trump is planning to invade through some form or fashion Venezuela. Your thoughts, what do you see? Is this, again, more distraction? Or is there a real concern that Donald Trump could go ahead and push a button on Venezuela?
Well, now, if you're talking about MAGA and Make America Great Again, what he's doing is he's taking us back to the days of the banana wars, particularly in the 20s and the 30s, when Smedley Butler served, for example, and called himself a criminal for capitalism on 2 continents. And he was absolutely right. But even in those cases, generally speaking, some consultation with the Congress was made, and even in many cases, some kind of resolution was made in order to authorize the Banana Republic attack on Guatemala, or the changing of the guard in Tehran. There were members of the Congress who knew what was going on, and members of the Congress who briefed other members of the Congress. not saying it was perfect, but at least the legislative branch had something to do with it. And certainly our actions weren't perfect. We do not need to go back to the period that Smedley Butler talked about, even testified to Congress about. That's when he said he was a criminal for capitalism on two continents. Compared himself to Al Capone, except he said he was a bigger crook than Al Capone. And that's what we did. You know, he made something like 35 different moves with the military into largely Latin American countries, but it also included China back in the time when we were trying to open China. So this is a guy who knew what he was talking about, and we're going back to that. We're going back to outlaw nation. That's what we are. Right now, killing people on the high seas without due process, we are an outlaw nation. And let me tell you how bad it is, really how bad it is. My daughter asked me the other day, and another person chimed in too, well, didn't the Patriot Act authorize you guys to do this on the high seas after 9/11? I said, au contraire. Let me tell you what we did on the high seas after 9/11. We went after something far more dangerous than drugs. We went after plutonium and uranium being shipped on the high seas, often with no guards or security personnel whatsoever, often in a lone ship. How was that happening? Well, let me tell you how it was happening. Japan produces more fine, high-grade plutonium than anybody on Earth. And they were shipping it to France to fuel France's mini nuclear reactors in a single ship with a very small crew and very little security. We were guarding all of these things. We were searching the high seas everywhere we could. We had all manner of equipment out doing it because we were deathly afraid bin Laden or someone like him was going to get their hands on nuclear material. We never used force against these ships. And oftentimes when we would ask the flagging company, most often Panama, we would ask them for permission, as per law, to fast rope down on or load ourselves onto some other way, a ship that we were concerned about. We would get permission to do it, but not in time to check any contraband. In other words, they throw the contraband over. Mm-hmm. But even with that frustration and even with the deadly nature of what we were trying to find, we never violated due process and never killed anybody without legal sanction to do so. That's what Trump is doing now for trumped up drugs. There's no fentanyl coming out of Venezuela. His entire professional intelligence community has told him that. Laura Loomer is telling him fentanyl is coming out of Venezuela. There's not a whole lot of drugs coming out of Venezuela. There are some, but not a lot. Right. And most of those that are coming out aren't coming to the United States. It's other countries that are sending it to the United States. He recently learned that by being caught in the hallway by Tulsi Gabbard. And so he now is starting some action against Colombia. And you'll notice he struck someone in the Pacific because a Navy admiral told him the drugs that are coming to the United States, sir, are coming through the Pacific, not the Caribbean. So he struck someone in the Pacific. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
I'm glad nobody's telling him it's coming from the moon because he'd blow up the space station.
He'd try. Or Canada. You better believe he'd bomb Canada.
Carol Asbaram, thank you for your super sticker. The people must vote en masse to select a candidate regardless of the state affiliation to get better candidates. Carol, thank you. And also I have to thank you, Carol. I did not see last week your contribution to the program last week. I think it was Friday. So thank you very much, Carol. And please forgive me for not recognizing your contribution last week. And I think it's Starch Manning as well. Thank you as well from last week. I did not see those contributions from last week. So thank you all very much. Final question for you about, they say that the bombs we send overseas will explode at home. This continuing usurpation of domestic security by the federal government. How concerned are you about that?
Very. James Madison, were he here with us today, would say that would be the deepest concern he had, because his whole philosophy, one he infused the Bill of Rights with, he was pretty much single-handedly responsible for the Bill of Rights, and for getting it through. He would say security belongs to the people. Read the Constitution. Security belongs to the states and the people, ultimately to the people. Where security has national impact, that is to say, a foe from overseas coming to hit us, then the federal government may muster the power of the people and the states to fight off that foe. But anything domestic, other than a full-blown insurrection, which is another matter, that's what Trump is trying to foment with ICE in these cities. Other than that, the federal authority has no responsibility for the people's security. In fact, the federal government taking that responsibility is the surest way to tyranny.
You mentioned ICE. So let's look. So basically what we have right now in a number of cities, and Trump is trying to expand this, federalizing the National Guard troops, sending Marines into Los Angeles. We have an American president using the American military to turn its guns on American citizens in American cities. And that is expanding. You got ICE repelling. I think we talked about the Black Hawk helicopters the last time that you were on. This is. It seems as though the idea or the project is to create a circumstance where the president can claim martial law. Is that what we had?
I think the preliminary phase one is to attack his enemies politically.
Yes.
That is to say, go the places where the Democrats have strongholds. That's his first objective. And then second, if he's ready to bring about the insurrection because of the midterms turning sour, I think he wants to do it at the end of the third year, maybe the beginning of the fourth year. But if he feels like he's got to do it because the midterms are turning sour, then we'll see more zealous action by ICE to produce the kind of reciprocation, if you will, that they would get in the south side of Chicago, for example, if they really got mean. Because there are more guns in the south side of Chicago than probably in a military armory in Illinois. So you provoke the insurrection, as it were, and then you can invoke the Insurrection Act, and then you're off to the coup.
And Congress will, based upon the current construct of Congress, they will sit idly by and allow that to happen.
I think so. We did see a reaction. We saw Tim Kaine lead and others join him, and they almost got passed a ruling that Trump could not use force against Venezuela unless the Congress gave him approval. And you may have noted that 2 Republicans crossed the aisle and voted with the Democrats, and Fetterman of Pennsylvania, the Democrat of Pennsylvania, voted with the Republicans. But they came very close to getting a simple majority anyway, and were the people to wake up a little bit in the Congress and understand that this use of force against Venezuela is clearly an outlaw action. And past that, we'd be off to the races, at least, with the first meaningful objection to Donald Trump's attempt to gain absolute power.
Final question for you, Marjorie Taylor Greene. So you were just talking about people crossing the aisle. Marjorie Taylor Greene, much to my surprise, I never thought I would find an issue that I would be calling her out and applauding her. We can talk about her intent, the motivations behind what she's doing, but she's standing up against the president. I'm a little surprised there aren't more people now falling in line with her, but she is standing up and opposing the president.
She is, and I think she's doing it for the reason that any congresswoman or man should do it. Her constituents are telling her, that the Republican Party on this issue is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And this issue is mostly Gaza.
Right.
And that should be happening to others. But I'll tell you, you've got to go back to town hall meetings in order to hear your constituents.
Well, that's true.
And you would be amazed how many of these people just don't go back anymore.
Well, because Mike Johnson told them not to have them anymore because the optics were so ugly.
And look at the optics he created by not approving that Arizona woman who was elected duly. And I mean, what a joke he is. What a joke.
Especially when we know eventually he's just kicked the can down the road in an alley because there's a wall. You are going to have to swear her in. You cannot avoid this. And
now he's creating real hot opposition in an area where the Republicans thought they had a lock on things. Arizona.
Colonel Wilkerson, as always, sir, thank you for your service. Thank you so much for your time, your clarity and analysis. Man, I just really enjoy being able to talk with you. Thank you so much for joining the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Greatly appreciate it, and look forward to having you back. Because also I want to talk about that the other. Hang on a second. Don't go anywhere yet. I just got a message from a top secret location. Oh, I need to ask you how people can find you.
How they can find me?
Yes.
LB Wilk at wm.edu.
Okay. LB Wilk at, give it one more time. LB
WILK at wm.edu.
Got you. Thank you very much. And see, I get communiques from top secret locations. And
code word, huh?
No, but I do want to get you on to talk about your organization and this constitutional amendment, because the Citizens United case has to be overturned. That's the biggest one of the humongous threats to our Constitution and our representative democracy is the amount of corporate dollars that have found their way into the coffers of elected officials. There's no rationale for that at all.
No, it's polluting our entire process.
Greatly appreciate. Again, Colonel Wilkerson, thank you, sir. Look forward to talking to you soon.
Take care.
All right, folks. Hey, Melody. Now I done forgot who the guest is for tomorrow. Mel, can you send me that to the top secret link? Who I forgot who we have tomorrow. Hey, folks, thank you all for joining me today. Thank Colonel Wilkerson for joining me today. There we go. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. New episode tomorrow. Kimon Freeman is going to join us tomorrow. Folks, people are about to lose their SNAP benefits. Folks that aren't already going hungry, those that are on the verge, will start going hungry on the 1st of November. And we're going to get some great insight and WIC benefits as well. We're going to get some insight to that tomorrow with Kimon Freeman is going to join us. Follow, subscribe, leave a review to all of you that supported us today. Thank you all very much. Remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. Have a blessed remainder of your day. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.